Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first Perspectives for Higher Education webinar held under the auspices of the Cognitive Science Society. My name is Anna Papafragu. I am the past president of the Society and chair of the Society's Higher Education Committee that brings you this webinar. On behalf of the committee, we're very excited to see so many of you here today. The Cognitive Science Higher Education Committee was recently created to serve as a hub for various cognitive science training programs at all levels of higher education. Our plan is to collect and share information on undergraduate and graduate cognitive science programs worldwide, provide a forum for faculty, interested students, and leaders of cognitive science programs, centers, or other units, and support the development of a new new series of cognitive science programs globally by sharing information and best practices. An important new initiative is a new webinar series dedicated to issues of cognitive science in higher education. Today's webinar is the first in this series, and a second webinar has been planned for the beginning of June. I'm going to give you details at the end of the session. There's additional webinars underway for next year. These events are designed to spark discussion, share experiences, and provide practical guidance for cognitive science educators, administrators, and students. And we hope that we'll see many of you in this series and that you'll spread the word to your friends, students, or colleagues. We also hope that you'll be involved in all higher education activities. You'll be in touch with our committee, and you're going to even volunteer to join us. I want to thank the members of our committee, Jenny Culbertson, Matt Goldrick, Joe Cable, and Joe Toscano for all the work they've done in planning this webinar and the other webinars in the series. Today's webinar is titled Challenges and Opportunities for Cognitive Science in Higher Education. It's meant to give an overview of the evolving landscape of cognitive science education, from the challenges of interdisciplinary program management to the opportunities for innovative teaching and research. We are thrilled to have four prominent speakers with us today. Matt Goldrick is a professor in the Department of Linguistics and director of the Cognitive Science program at Northwestern University. Hannah Rohde is a professor in linguistics and English language at the University of Edinburgh. Tania Lombrozo is the Arthur W. Marks 19 Professor of Psychology, Director of the Cognitive Science Program, and co-director of the Initiative on Natural and Artificial Minds at Princeton University. And Asli Özyürek is the Director of the Multimodal Language Department at the Max Planck Institute for Psycholinguistics, as well as a professor at the Donders Institute for Brain, Cognition, and Behavior, and an affiliated researcher at the Center for Language Studies at Radboud University. Each speaker will have 7 minutes, followed by 3 minutes of questions, and we'll reserve about 15 minutes for general discussion with the entire panel at the end. I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker. Matt, you're on.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna. And thank you, Anna, for all of the hard work you have done in putting this event together. Really excited about that. So today, I want to argue that we could really strengthen our field by enhancing how we train young cognitive scientists. So the challenge I want to talk about, the argument I want to make, is that our field is not as interdisciplinary as it could be. And part of where that's coming from is that most of the training that our majors receive is unidisciplinary. That is, most of the courses they take are as a computer science course for computer science majors, a psychology course for psychology majors. And that unidisciplinary training makes people who are very much more disciplinary bound. So, but I think this is coupled with an opportunity, which is that we can build a stronger discipline by preparing students for this challenge. How do you knit together all of these unidisciplinary experiences into a greater whole? So the first part here is I want to argue that cognitive science falls short of its interdisciplinary goals. I don't want to say that cognitive science is dead. I want to say cognitive science is very much alive, but it could be better. Two problems, I think, that I and other people have talked about. One is that cognitive psychology is overrepresented in the field, both in terms of its perspectives and the people who take place in the field. Cognitive psychology is overweighted. Another concern that a number of folks have recently been talking about is how empirical data and gathering new data dominates over development of theory. I think that both of these, they have many different sources, but I think one of the sources is unidisciplinary training. What do I mean by that? So Nunez et al. 2019, in an infamous but really great article, talked about this problem in a couple of different ways. Here's one figure that I think is pretty telling. So on the x-axis, you have a whole bunch of different CogSci programs. On the y-axis, you have percentage of courses that are required that are actually labeled as cognitive science courses. That is, they are explicitly designed for cognitive science. And one of the things they point out here is that if you draw a line arbitrarily at 50% to being labeled CogSci, 3/4 of the programs fall below that point. So most programs, the majority of classes you're taking are not cognitive science specific. So, and this I think is not just because cognitive scientists are lazy and don't want to teach. I think where this is coming from is if you are a non-departmental program, as Northwestern Cognitive Science is, it's really hard to have a lot of cognitive science specific courses. So we have 1/2 of one faculty member who's specifically devoted to cognitive science. She's an amazing faculty member, but she's just one person. So if you look at the total number of courses required for our major is 14. There are only 2 courses that are required specifically designed for CogSci students. And then the optional courses that students could take, really we're usually offering about 2, that's total over the 4 years that they could take. So at best, students are getting 10 out of 14 courses that are not designed for cognitive scientists. So what do we do about this? I think there is an opportunity for us here. So what I want to argue is that we have to acknowledge the fact that students are going to have these unidisciplinary experiences. I don't see that changing. Like that's just, especially in the context of the US funding environment right now, that's not going to change. So how do we deal with this problem? So I think in an introductory course, you need to emphasize disciplinary diversity. This is not just, let's talk about psychology, neuroscience, sprinkle in a little bit of AI, maybe have some philosophy if we think that's fun. I think you need to make sure that you're incorporating a wide range of perspectives, both within disciplines and across disciplines. Key skill I think students need to have is the ability to shift between different disciplines. So you don't want them to just learn about neuroscience as a linguist, let's say, but actually be able to inhabit to some degree the perspective of a neuroscientist when you're looking at data. And then practice moving into a different perspective. Because that's really, I think, what you need to do to be able to engage in these unidisciplinary courses deeply. And then, of course, you better advertise why is cognitive science actually good over and above just taking a bunch of random classes in these different disciplines. You should be emphasizing that there's ways to integrate these different insights and that actually that provides benefits over and above studying any one traditional discipline. When you turn to advanced courses, you need to do all of the above, I think. You need to keep reinforcing that. Over and above that, you need to really explicitly challenge students to try and knit together different ideas themselves. So I think the dream is that we're going to be training people who will find new interdisciplinary fusions beyond what we're able to find. Let me give you a few concrete examples of how I see this playing out. So one comes from a course I teach, an introductory course. I frame a big part of the course around this really amazing review article by Asfa Majid. In this, she argues that if you want to understand olfaction, you can't just be a philosopher, you can't just be a neuroscientist, you can't just be a psychologist, you can't just be an anthropologist. You actually need to do all of those things and understand and engage with all of those to really understand how human olfaction works. And so I think it sets up students just with the expectation that, oh, this is what cognitive science could be. I'll also put a plug for Josh Rotman's course. He's on this call. I met him through our cognitive science directors list. He's got this really awesome introductory course where he looks at a common topic, morality, through the lens of a whole bunch of different disciplines. So the same topic, like explored from a whole bunch of different perspectives. And I think that is a really powerful way to do training. At the advanced level, I'll just mention briefly, Erin Ledden, my colleague here at Northwestern, and what we've been experimenting with, which she's been experimenting with, is in a pro seminar that's an advanced course where there's a whole bunch of different faculty coming together. What she's having students do is explicitly connect each faculty member they're experiencing to their course readings and to critically to other courses they've taken, to bring their own knowledge to bear on understanding each unidisciplinary speaker they experience. So I think unidisciplinary training is not great for our field, and I think if we improved it, we could have a much stronger discipline. And I am at time, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks very much. And we have time for questions from the audience or other panelists. I have a question to get us started. You mentioned this challenge and the opportunity for cross-disciplinary pollination at the course level. This is, I have found, very exciting for, let's say, undergrads, but it's also very challenging because you are integrating all of these perspectives at the same time, and students feel that they have to now know the literature across 4 different subfields as opposed to 1. How do you go about addressing that?
Yeah, that is definitely a challenge. What I try and do is I say, what I would like you to do is, here are some very specific pieces of evidence, and I want you to work on integrating those. That's at the very introductory level. And then I think you just want to scaffold that quite a bit. So really kind of making sure that people aren't going way too deep on any one thing. It has to say a little bit shallow as an undergraduate. And I think sort of gradually expanding that is the right way to approach that.
Terrific. I have a question from Matthew Dye asking, any thoughts on team teaching for introductory CogSci courses? Could that work well?
You know, in an ideal world, yes. I can say from fighting with administrators for literally 2 decades, it's a losing battle. It's very hard to get people to embrace team teaching, unless faculty members, I should say, are willing to teach basically twice as many courses. So if they are willing to get half credit for co-teaching a course, then the administration is fine. So ideally, yes, but I haven't, if anyone has an idea of how to sell this to administrators, I would love to hear about it, but we have had so much trouble making this happen.
Terrific. Another question, Didi Ramsan Chin asks, could you give us another example of what an interdisciplinary CogSci focused course would look like?
So I talked about, I think it's really that dependent on the instructor. So you should try and find what it is that speaks best to you, I think. I think that's really what Josh did in his class as part of it. He works on morality as one of his core areas. I think it's finding something where you can find a topic that you have seen the benefit from looking at across of different sources and then introducing it through that concrete example. That would be, it's not very, I don't know if that's very helpful, but I think it start with your own specialization and work out from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems we have other ideas from people in interest about team teaching and intro course. Mei-Ling Lai. We don't have a lot of time, so I think we can come back to this topic probably towards the end for the panel discussion. It's definitely very interesting for a lot of people. So I want to thank Matt, and I want to move on to our next speaker, Hannah.
Great. Hello. Let me get myself going.
Great.
Right. So I, here in Edinburgh, we have an undergraduate cognitive science degree that I've been helping coordinate for the last 10 years or so. And I guess I would say that this year was probably my favorite year for cognitive science here. This was in part because I was teaching on a course that was co-taught. So faculty from linguistics and philosophy and psychology, we were teaching together, also in part because I got to teach in the weird and wonderful room. This is the old anatomy lecture theater in Edinburgh, and this is the picture is the day that I was teaching about information theory, and the students were sitting looking down, pretending they were watching dissections and surgeries from 200 years ago or something. But even when we're not in weird and wonderful rooms, the cognitive science program here, I think it's great in its flexibility, but the questions that Matt was raising about whether we really integrate or we just kind of sample across disciplines is a challenge we have. So the upsides, as I tell the students, is that they have this huge freedom. They get to keep their options open as they figure out what they want to specialize in. Selfishly for me, it's a small cohort of really excellent students to work with. But as I tell them, the downside that there's just this risk of slipping between the cracks, that they're trying to build up enough background in order to take advanced level courses across 3 or 4 departments where they're going to be studying with cognitive scientists who are kind of scattered through philosophy, psychology, linguistics, computer science. And these are all people who are interested in similar related big questions and bringing to those questions their methods and perspectives from their disciplines. But the students, there aren't enough hours in the day to get a full background in linguistics and a full background in psychology and a full background in philosophy. And we're reliant on the goodwill of these departments to allow our students to take these courses. So this question of how do you balance this breadth so it doesn't get too diffuse. They're taking courses across 4 different departments. They, physically they can hang out in these buildings and labs across these 4 departments and get involved in student groups, research groups. But how socially do you give them a sense of identity that they are studying something that is cohesive? As a bit of background, in Scotland, high school students pick their degree, they apply to a specific degree program. So at the end of high school, they have to know what they want to study. And then at university, they have some outside courses, but mostly they're just taking courses for their degree. And so I often ask them just, how did you even hear about the existence of cognitive science? And some of them have been into this stuff. They've been reading books and watching YouTube videos for years, and some of them admit that they actually ended up here by mistake. They usually have a good time anyway, but it is a real question of just how, as a university, they run these open days where we bring students on campus, prospective students, and we do our tap dance routine and say, here's cognitive science, there are big questions, the mind, what's knowledge, what is consciousness, how do machines talk and reason and move? But we still have a very small degree. We've actually taken to contacting students who have applied to related disciplines to say, have you heard about cognitive science? Students who take the introduction to cognitive science course, sometimes they ask, can I transfer to this degree? I'd never heard of it. So we have to make the degree flexible enough that you can discover it late and still get on board. This course that I mentioned, so this is co-taught in the sense that we take turns teaching it. So this is, you get a philosopher, a psychologist, and a linguist who are each weighing in on these big questions about what's innate, what's learnable, how do you represent the outside world, how do we see the world given that we're in the physical body that we're in, how do we process information, draw inferences, learn language, how does language evolve? But this is the only course that is really the cognitive science title, as Matt was saying, that everything else is kind of sampling from the grab bag of related courses across the university. And so the students, they take this course and then they start charting their own pathway, which is an advertisement that they can make their own path and decide what they want to study. But we're trying to kind of pack in as much as possible. So as an example, in year 1, they have 6 courses they can fill, and they must take this intro course, they must take an intro to linguistics, and then we get them to take something in philosophy, like logic, something in psychology, and then they have 2 outside courses, but we often try to encourage them, if you want to get as much background as possible so that you'll be in a position to take upper level courses, you might want to try to get as much background as you can. And then in year 2, they have a couple outside courses, and then they really are focusing on cognitive science. But they can go broad. They can dive into one department that they fall in love with. They can pick a particular topic that they're really curious about, and then see how the philosophers and the psychologists and the computer scientists and the linguists all grapple with that topic. And then they all do a dissertation in their 4th year. And we often ask them kind of, what ties it all together for them, and students will mention that there are specific courses that they've taken where suddenly these threads that they were seeing in these different courses kind of come together, and these are names of courses that are in different departments. Some of them mention the 4th year dissertations, so these are titles from previous recent dissertations, and it's a chance to work one-on-one with a supervisor. Selfishly, it's this chance to work on topics, sometimes co-supervise projects that I wouldn't otherwise have gotten into. And that opportunity, I think we enjoy seeing them contribute to the knowledge of the field. There's a student society, we run annual events, and we've wondered about, could we have some kind of bring it all back together course at the end of the 4 years, but then we get stuck where we think, well, we don't even know what that would cover. Like, what is the punchline of here's cognitive science and what is cognitive science? And the last note that I was going to end on is that we've been, I guess, struggling to figure out how to teach computational components for cognitive science. So we want to convey that computation is in many ways core to cognitive science for modeling, for computational applications, just running experiments, looking at corpora, having a logical mindset. But then we just run into all kinds of questions of how do you convince students that you're trying to link these core basic programming skills to something that's these high level theoretical big picture questions. How do you assess this stuff? How do you step back and say, well, what are the fundamental elements of computation that we want to teach? Where is the field going forward? So we haven't solved that at all, but I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Thank you. I have a question which I think is related, and you've probably partly addressed it. But Vedrana Chemerin Dujmic says, at a practical level, wouldn't you need to build up some knowledge of specific fields before you offer interdisciplinary CogSci training, right? And I saw that the way you structured the program does include these courses in the beginning. So the perspective here is that perhaps this would be more suitable to graduate level training, but I wanted to see your perspective.
I think it's one of those cases where you want both to be first. Like I think about that for when I took syntax and like typology within linguistics, that you need to know of enough structure to be interested in how there can be variation, but then you only make sense of some of the structures because you've seen that there is variation. And so this kind of seeing what kind of questions you can ask across different areas of cognitive science, but then concretely seeing, well, how would you dig in with a specific method or tool? I don't have a great answer to it, but it feels like you kind of want both. You want to start to see this bird's eye view that there are these common themes, but to have it be concrete enough that you're actually doing something, that it's not just abstract.
Exactly. And a question from Matthew Dye about teaching computational skills. That's a real challenge, especially at the grad level for students with no coding background. I have to borrow CompSci faculty. They are in high demand from their own department and reluctant to teach coding skills. Not solved that one yet. So how do you crack the computation, puzzle?
I mean, we had, for this intro course, we had a programming lab component, which we've recently removed, which kind of breaks my heart. So we would promise students that you didn't have to have any background in computer science, that we would take you by the hand, and we would try to come up with tasks that at least built towards some of the ideas that we were looking at of what's learnable from transition probabilities across the input in some sequence, or some hook that linked up to what they were doing in class. But they often reported that they just didn't see why learning what a variable was and learning what a for loop was had anything to do with these higher level questions about what is consciousness. Though a lot of the PhD students are very talented, so kind of they've been driving some of those labs and
discussions. Thank you. Great ideas. And there's more questions coming in. We have to turn it over to Tania, but thank you so much, Hannah. And we'll come back to a lot of these themes towards the end.
All right, so hopefully you are seeing my slides and you're able to hear me. And I will set a timer so that I'm well behaved. So thank you so much for inviting me to participate. This is a topic that I think a lot about, and so I have found it valuable already to learn from Matt and from Hannah and to learn from all of you. So given the theme, I thought I would talk about two challenges and opportunities for cognitive science, and you'll definitely see some resonance with what we've already heard from our other two speakers. So the first is how to be interdisciplinary in a disciplinary world. And the form this takes as a challenge is that I think it's quite rare to have a cognitive science department. I suspect most of us are coming from universities that do not have a cognitive science department, probably have very few or zero faculty who are principally committed to cognitive science. And instead we have programs, centers, institutions, all sorts of other kinds of structures that try to create this program. But one of the ways we tend to do so is by relying on all of these discipline-specific courses, right? So the problem, I think, related to what Matt raised in particular is, if you have a student who takes philosophy of mind in philosophy, they take cognitive psychology in psychology, and then they take interlinguistics in linguistics, and so on, are they really getting the interdisciplinary perspective that we want them to get in cognitive science so that they actually have some sort of a coherent experience? And the field of cognitive science, as we all know, is very broad and heterogeneous. And from my perspective, this is a feature, not a bug. I don't think we want to corral everybody into a single track for what cognitive science looks like. So I think we want to support this, but how do we support that kind of heterogeneity where you have some students coming at this from an interest in neuroscience or memory or language or computation, yet having some sort of a coherent disciplinary core? So what I thought I would do is present sort of some approaches that I have seen to trying to create some coherence, and then tell you the approach that that I've been trying to adopt largely at Princeton as the director of the program of cognitive science here currently. All right, so here's one kind of approach. This is sort of a topical approach. And actually it sounds like Josh Rotman's course that we heard mentioned sounds like a phenomenal instance of this. The thought here is that you bring in lots of different disciplines around one unifying topic, right? So you teach a course on olfaction or morality or music or memory. And so the coherence comes from the topical focus, but then you approach that topic from all of these different sorts of disciplines. And I think having this in conjunction with the more discipline-based classes can be a way for students to start to see those connections across fields. Another kind of approach is a sort of like focus area approach, rather than saying that we're going to be a cognitive science program that tries to do everything in the cognitive science octagon these days. We're going to pick a subset and really build the connections across those. And so, for example, there's at least one program that I know of that focuses particularly on philosophy, neuroscience, and psychology. And across those disciplines really does kind of create a coherent core. And you can imagine, really for any subset of cognitive science fields having an approach like that. Another is what I'd say is having a kind of core field or a home field for cognitive science. And my sense is that programs that do this, it's usually because cognitive science emerged from a particular department, right? So if you're at a particular university where cognitive science as a program really came out of the philosophy department, for example, then it really might be that through philosophy, you sort of get some connections to the other disciplines, but then you're connecting the other disciplines, your exposure to them really comes from those discipline-specific courses. Or if you're in a particular place where cognitive science really emerged from neuroscience, then neuroscience might play that kind of core field role. So these are different models that I feel like I've seen across different places, and I think they all have some of their pros and cons. I've really been struggling with what the right model is, and I don't think there's going to be a best model for every institution. I think we're all responding to the particulars of the kinds of contexts we're working in. But one metaphor that I found useful, or one way I've been thinking about this, is what I'm calling the scaffold model. And the idea here is that what I see as the role for the cognitive science program is to really create the infrastructure to support all sorts of pairwise connections between these disciplines. But what that's going to look like for any particular student or any particular faculty member might actually be really different, right? Because we're all working at different areas within this interdisciplinary structure. And so what cognitive science can do that the individual departments aren't necessarily doing on their own is creating the potentials for all of these pairwise connections. So what does this look like concretely? I'll give you just a handful of examples. One is in our own program, we have a variety of small funding opportunities. This is not a large amount of money, but it's sort of like little small seed grants for student research. And we have that at both the undergraduate and the PhD student level. And what we really try to support there are projects that are making these pairwise connections. So for example, we prioritize if a PhD student wants to have $1,000 to sort of collect some pilot data to start a new project, we're going to really give priority to those students who are talking to 2 faculty members across different disciplines or subdisciplines within cognitive science. And I think this also gives students an opportunity to explore areas that might not be supported within their traditional disciplinary structure, right? If they're in a particular PI in a particular department that has some sort of funding opportunities and some grants within that department that are discipline specific, this is an opportunity to think more broadly than that. Another way we try to support it is through courses. And I just thought I'd show you 3 examples that I think are nice examples of this at Princeton. we do not have faculty members in Princeton who are appointed within cognitive science. And so we're reliant on what faculty members who are hired in other departments and have teaching obligations to their departments are willing and able to teach. And so this is an awesome class I wish I could have taken by my colleagues Adele Goldrick and Elizabeth Margulis on music and language, right? So really taking this topic, but having these two faculty members from different disciplines engaging together around this. My colleague in psychology, Asli taught a class on systems, sort of broadly construed. And so sort of through the lens of thinking about what are the dynamics and properties and characteristics and dangers of human-made systems, was really able to find this sort of focus, but then approach it through a variety of different disciplinary lenses. My colleague Molly Crockett is teaching a class called Unlocking the Science of Human Nature. And so she's really tackling questions about human nature, but with all of these different disciplines informing these questions. Final example, and I'll have to speak quickly for my next point. Final example, this comes from some talk series through a program we have here called Natural and Artificial Minds within our AI lab. And these were organized by PhD students who are this phenomenal group of enthusiastic students who organize these events. They called them colloquiums. So they're like colloquia, but they're meant to be very casual and student oriented. But the structure that they've taken is to pick a topic and then have two faculty members from different departments come and have a casual conversation about that topic. And I think that's a really nice model for how, even if you don't have coursework that's necessarily supporting all of these kinds of connections, because you don't have faculty who have that kind of committed teaching and service role, there's ways to create these connections for students. And these are directed more towards our PhD students, and they've been very popular events. Okay, that's my 7 minutes. So I'm just going to flag the other issue for people to ask me questions about if they have. I put it second because I thought everybody else would talk about it, but they haven't yet. and this is just the challenge of thinking about cognitive science in the age of AI, right? I think we probably have all seen on our campuses the student interest in AI, how many students are majoring in computer science, how many resources are being directed towards that. And I think there's a real opportunity there for cognitive science, but I also think there's some risks. And so that's something we can talk about if people are interested in. All right, so I will skip that, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thanks, Tania. I do have a question in the chat from Meling Lai. Do you have any advice on connecting with faculty to either encourage them to design more interdisciplinary classes or to otherwise connect with non-departmental CogSci programs?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that we've struggled with something that it sounds like Matt and Hannah mentioned as well, that unless a faculty member's primary service and teaching commitment is to cognitive science, they're kind of doing you a favor, or the department is kind of doing you a favor when they commit their time to cognitive science. And so I think one of the things that we have tried to do, one of them is try to have postdocs or graduate students be the drivers of connections across faculty. And if you have PhD students themselves being the ones who are looking around for the interesting connections, and then perhaps starting a research project that ends up being co-advised by two faculty, that ends up being one of the mechanisms through which those two faculty learn about each other's research, interact, find connections, and that can be the beginning of lots of other things. It can be the beginning of a co-taught course. It can be the beginning of a collaborative grant proposal. In the days when there was science funding in the United States that you could apply to like that, and so on. Right. So I think really thinking about the role of students in driving this can sometimes be effective because faculty are already so busy and so overcommitted. So that's one route. The other thing that we've tried to do is we have found, I think there's a problem that I've seen at every cognitive science program I've been a part of, which is we have an interdisciplinary talk series. When you invite a linguist, the linguists come. And when you invite a philosopher, the philosophers come. And when you invite a psychologist, psychologists come, and so on. And so I think trying to create opportunities where people come together around topics rather than around disciplines, I think can be effective. So for example, organizing a panel discussion or a dinner that's on a topic like language and society, and where you try to have connections between that to people in computer science doing NLP, but also in linguistics, and then maybe also people thinking about something in anthropology, right? Sort of finding those thematic foci, because then I think people don't think about themselves as falling kind of outside of it disciplinarily, and I think they see the opportunity for what they're going to learn from the other disciplines that's going to be relevant to them.
Thank you, Tania. Lots of great ideas. Let's move on. There's things we will definitely come back to, including AI and computation. We have questions in the chat here we haven't addressed. Thank you. And I'll turn it over now to Asli.
So yeah, first of all, thanks for the invitation, and thanks everyone for joining. I think this is a nice session. So I'm Asli Özyürek. As Anna said, I'm the director of the Multimodal Language Department at the Max Planck Institute for Psycholinguistics. So at the MPI, we don't do teaching. So we have graduate students from PhD students and onwards. You know, I'm not in a certain cognitive science program, and I'm not involved in any kind of broad teaching. But we are part of the Radboud University, and we are part of the Donders Institute for Brain Cognition and Behavior there. So we form a network of Donders network with them. So we do some teaching with our colleagues at the Radboud University, specifically Donders Institute, which itself is a very interdisciplinary cognitive sciencey field. So I'll tell you a bit more about how that feels like. Okay, so there are no undergraduate cognitive science programs, but there is a Master of Science program for cognitive neuroscience. So here we rarely talk about cognitive science alone, but we usually talk about it like broader cognitive neuroscience. So this is coordinated by principal investigators from 4 different faculties, Faculty of Science, Social Sciences, Humanities, and even the medical faculty. So in this sense, it has a very broad perspective, which I really like. So the idea is really to study and teach cognitive and neural bases of diverse brain functions, such as perception, action, language, attention, and memory, including dysfunction, disorders, or any or brain damage, injury, etc. So I think this makes it very broad. This is not only at the level of teaching, of course. The teaching is directly linked to how we do research. So this paragraph here also describes the breadth of the research, and we try to teach it directly to link it to what the researchers find relevant for their own program. As far as I know, it's unique in the Netherlands for its interdisciplinary breadth. And when it started almost 20 years ago, I think it was the most diverse program on this field ever. Right now, there are smaller programs, I think, but still, I find it quite broad. Sorry. So how we do it is there are actually topics. I think maybe Tania was talking about it. So the program is divided into topics. One is, or we call them teams here. Language communication is one teach. Here we can teach about like psycholinguistics, neurolinguistics, multilingualism, acquisition, multimodal language. Another team is perception, action, and decision making. Another one is development and lifelong plasticity. And this team is quite, translational aspect. So it is conducted with patients in the hospital, like aphasia, Alzheimer, and so on. And the final one is really about how the brain works, the networks of brains. And then recently it has hooked up to neurotechnology, brain-computer coupling. But what is nice is that in all these themes, always these things are taught taking neural perspective, cognitive perspective, and behavioral perspectives to these issues. So if I'm teaching something on multimodal language, I teach some brain aspects of it, some behavioral aspects, and some cognitive aspects of multimodal language. So if somebody is teaching on memory or action, they again teach it at all these levels. And master students can also, sometimes combine these themes, what are the relations between language and action, for example. So they can also have the opportunity to be part of a main theme, but they can also connect to the other themes to make it even more interdisciplinary. So I think in this way, we really don't talk about linguists, psychologists, philosophers, anthropologists, and those definitions are really not there at all. But themes and different layers of perspectives you can take. I think Matt was talking about how can you approach the same issue from different disciplinary ideas, neural, cognitive, and behavioral. They also have to take some common courses together. We even teach neurophilosophy to give them to a higher level and so on. And then, so I'll finish by what kind of opportunities are there in this program that has been around for 20 years and what kind of challenges there are. So, I mean, as you know, previously everybody mentioned, so all students themselves also tell us that they have a need to connect all these teams with AI and computational methods, not only, for example, the language team, but the memory action. I mean, they want this integration with computational methods and all levels. And what is good about is that originally AI department was not part of this master program, but now the AI department is also interested in teaching their own students on language cognition and learning, because, you know, a lot of AI students also want to know about cognition these days. I get a lot of students telling me, you know, I studied machine learning, but I really want to learn how humans think or something. So there's this new generation of students coming to us that from machine learning to learn about cognition and language, which is nice. So I see this as an opportunity actually to merge these fields. But I think we also have a responsibility to teach students how to use AI tools for research and also how to use them critically. This also should be part of the cognitive science teaching programs, I think. So something else that has been happening in the last years is that there's a lot of need for, you know, doing applied research in Dutch universities, at least. I don't know about American universities. So these include, you know, also large language models, human-computer interaction, virtual reality, and so on. So for me, this is also an opportunity to bring this studying language and cognition in more situated contexts, so that, because we are asked to change our, you know, teaching modules in relation to these needs anyway, so we can use this opportunity to teach courses that, you know, they're more about language and cognition in real world situations, I think. And of course, there are challenges. There are budget cuts in Holland, maybe like in the US or other places, and internationalization is also not seen, and diversity is not seen as a good thing anymore as in other places. So as a result of this, they are cutting especially language courses, which is a bad thing, at least for people who are interested in language like I am. Cross-linguistic research, even, you know, smaller languages like sign languages are cut. So I was teaching a course on multimodal language, gesture, and sign, and this course was cut off. But then I said, okay, I will change it then to multimodal language cognition and computation, where I will teach human-robot interaction and things like that. Then they liked it, and now it's in the program again. So yeah, so we have to like move our way a little bit in this changing landscape. And so, and finally, I think as, you know, Iris van Rooij is also she's also from here, maybe she's in the audience. I mean, I agree with her completely that in this mission, we should definitely focus more on theory. And I think, yeah, that's it from my side.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Asli. We have a question from Ari Goldrick, who asks, can you please comment on what the audience is for a master's in cognitive neuroscience? So who tends to pursue a master's and with what goals in mind? And there's been some difficulty in terms of, you know, designing or thinking about how it might be useful for students from the asker's perspective, as opposed to, say, a PhD.
Oh, well, because in Europe, doing masters is really necessary for a PhD program. So people who have already studied just linguistics or just psychology or just something from around the world or in Netherlands, if they want to pursue a PhD, then they come to this program and then try to get into this program to get a broader perspective. including brain and cognition. So I think they come mostly to broaden their perspective and also to get a PhD later on. But these days, as I said, because in this program, more applied courses are also given on large language models and things like that. So they can also go to industry after that. So it's really then we are, I think, getting more students now that we are including these methods and AI approaches. We get more students than before. So around 100 students come every year for this master's program.
Thank you. I would like now to invite everybody to enter comments and questions in the chat for every member of the panel, like general questions. And I'm going to raise one that we've already begun discussing, and it has to do with AI/computation. You mentioned it, Asli, just now, and it has been raised by other people. We did get a question in the chat by Kevin Clark, who said, why is this new, right? AI, artificial intelligence, is listed as one of the official components of cognitive science. So what is new in terms of the challenges or opportunities that this field might pose? So, maybe Asli can take a first stab, and then I'll ask others.
Well, I mean, I think right now these machines can do much more than before, right? I think it is now very evident that we are seeing some machines really, I mean, talking like humans. I mean, they are getting very, very close. Of course, they have hallucinations and things like that, but they can do a lot of, they can solve a lot of cognitive problems that we thought they would never solve. And so they have really increased their capacity to be human-like. And this, raises interesting questions about how then this compares to human cognition and what is needed then. Do we need embodiment, for example, or how much data we need for these skills? So I think because it raises now new questions we didn't have before, because a machine that doesn't have a body can really talk, have decent conversations. So like for me, interesting is, okay, without having a body and experience and a vision, like how much can you do? For me, is interesting. So then that these tools are having cheaper or more available, more usable, I think it changes the field. And also that they are more human-like and makes it more interesting, new questions.
Thank you, Tania. Yeah, I was going to come to you next.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, I entirely agree with that. I think it does raise all sorts of new interesting questions. I'll raise a few other points. I think one thing that's different is I think there's a new risk, or at least a more acute risk. So I think cognitive scientists have actually historically, but also currently, been at the forefront of applying cutting edge tools and machine learning and AI more generally to a variety of areas. And that's been great. But what I see as a concern is whether or not that's going to dwarf the role of other areas of cognitive science and other methods that we also want to have represented in the field, right? So if we think about that cognitive science hexagon in the CogSci logo, I don't think we're currently succeeding in having perfect balance across those disciplines. And perfect balance might not be what we want to aspire to, but I think one risk is really having AI entirely dominate what the focus of our field is, and I think that would be a shame. And I think one form of that I worry about is, there's a famous story of the person looking for their keys under the light post, not because that's where they drop them, but because that's where the light is. And I think there's a little bit of a concern that we might start to reorient the kinds of questions that we ask in cognitive science to be the kinds of questions that lend themselves to current AI applications or current AI tools for analysis. And so I think that those are just concerns I think we need to have on our radar. And then there's the really just like the practical part, that there's all these undergraduates who are now, there's been an increase in interest in majoring computer science for a while, right? But we definitely see that, I think, in the last few years continuing to increase. And I think we're seeing, at least in the US, and I suspect internationally, but I don't know that for sure, a lot of institutional investment in AI. And so I think a practical question is, what does that mean for cognitive science? How do we benefit from that, but also without it distorting or redefining what our goals are as a field? I don't have answers to that, but those are some of the things that I've been thinking about as I think newer challenges, even though, of course, AI has been at the center of cognitive science from the outset.
Absolutely. I want to hand it over to Hannah, because she also mentioned computation more generally and the challenges of integrating a computational perspective and training people in computation, as well as all the other things that we want to integrate in CogSci training. Any additional thoughts, Hannah?
I mean, I guess I just think of programmers today are just programming differently than they did before. And so some of that nuts and bolts of how do you even teach some of these skills, that may look entirely different because that's not what programming looks like. I mean, that's kind of down in the details. I do think it's a good hook if there's students. I mean, because we often are trying to figure out how to recruit students or find students who might, I mean, we don't want them if they didn't want to study cognitive science, but if they didn't know about it and they could be introduced to it, I guess that does seem like it's on their radar in a way that it wasn't before. I think there are a lot of people, more so than me, other people who are very excited that we are now going to be interacting with information in this vastly different way, and that's some new frontier. I haven't made sense of that yet, but I think there are people who want to teach courses where that's what's foregrounded, of trying to understand language in a or understand cognition and processing and information and knowledge against this different backdrop. But I don't know what that means.
I want to also hand it over to Matt, because he already raised issues about how to integrate across different subfields. And so this aspect also bears on the things he discussed.
Yeah, I'll just briefly say that, you know, what I see part of a challenge here is that for cognitive modeling, Ken Forbes at Northwestern has been teaching a longstanding course that's been very accessible and successful at bringing students into kind of cognitive architecture-based approaches to incorporating AI into cognitive science. But I feel like the problem has been, how do we get, and as someone who uses kind of current AI techniques in my own research, I don't know how to get undergraduates involved in that work. Like, it's something that really, I feel like you need to be a graduate student before you can get involved in it. And so maybe I feel like over time we'll develop techniques to get people in the door and addressing a wide variety of questions in an interesting way. But right now, I don't even know how to get people in the door. That's been my challenge. Kind of have to take them, then they already have some knowledge, and then I can work with them, but I don't know how to get them past that initial hump. So
yeah. And this sounds like a topic that merits its own discussion and roundtable. I want to open the floor to Wednesday Bushon, who wants to ask her question.
Hello. Well, this already came up. I don't think I'll add anything new, but I just wanted to add that we have a course here, Computational Models in Cognitive Science, that I just taught for the first time this semester. And it was such a huge struggle. I was kind of hoping that a rising tide would lift all boats. People would have different backgrounds. And I sort of experienced the opposite, where everybody was brought down by not having the foundational information. So if there's anybody who's taught a course like this that has been successful, I'd love to hear it. And Anna, I love your idea of having a roundtable on this topic. So just wanted to add
Absolutely. That. And one, again, this is, as I said earlier, this is sort of an appetizer, not a full course. So we are just beginning to tackle these topics. It's very much our goal to create resources for all of us to do these things better and exchange ideas. I already see a lot of questions in the chat about, you know, things people can try. So this is definitely something we can all work together on and exchange ideas about. Thank you. I want to move away a little bit from the computation angle and talk about some of the topics that I see in the chat. So people are asking, what do you do when there is, let's say, one person interested in cognitive science? Our goal is to cover people that are coming from different institutions. It's great if you find a lot of people to co-teach. What about, you know, if you're the only one? Could you use, I'm combining now questions that I see coming up from different people. Could you use a system where you ask people to guest lecture, right? Maybe even, you know, remotely. How would you solve the question of, you know, bringing together different types of expertise in a creative way? And whoever wants to tackle that.
I can just jump in to say really quick that there are some existing textbooks for cognitive science, and they're not terrible. Like, I mean, they're not perfect. No textbook is perfect, but I feel like that's not a bad place to start. They have gone through several editions, they've been modified. And so that's maybe in the low hanging fruit. But then Tania, I'm sure will have a more sophisticated answer. Different, no.
No, it's not more sophisticated, but just one more thing to throw out there. I feel like we're actually in a very exciting moment in terms of the cognitive science content that is starting to be produced for a general audience. And I think you see this in general audience books, you see it in podcasts, you see it in blogs. There's a lot out there of very variable quality, but I think there are some things that are really fantastic. And so this is not going to work for every topic, but I think a really useful resource for when you're targeting undergraduates in particular can be to have some of those things as the entry point. And so, I mean, for example, I have an introduction to cognitive psychology course that I teach, but I teach it very much from a cognitive science perspective. And it doesn't happen for every single class and every single topic, but usually what I try to ask myself is for every main topic for the course, are they reading something from the primary research literature? So, I do want them to be reading journal articles and so on. And then are they reading something fun and accessible? And so for each of those topics, I try to have something that's either a podcast or a blog post or the chapter of a general audience book, or even a news article if I've had something, if there was a particular connection that week and so on. But I think in particular, if you're coming at it from yourself from one discipline, I think as an entry point, having those general audience resources can be really valuable.
Thoughts? Asli, Hannah, would you like to add something to that? No, we're good. There are more questions about resource sharing and comparing notes, so to speak, about how to teach cognitive science, especially at the undergraduate level. I just want to say that this is one of the explicit goals of the Higher Education Committee, and we are going to have actually dedicated webinars next year about how to design CogSci training programs at the undergraduate level. If you have more ideas about the notion of scaffolding that Tania mentioned, or this idea of sort of bringing people together to construct the curriculum, I'd like to hear a little more about that, especially for people who may be coming from completely different directions and can be in different types of institutions. Do you have any quick thoughts, Hannah? I know you talked about different layers and different ways of constructing a training program for different tastes and backgrounds.
Yeah, I think that when we were designing this co-taught course, it's that the students ask themselves of what is cognitive science and what are core questions in it, and I don't feel like I have a simple answer to that. And so I was liking hearing these examples where one might actually start very targeted, so music, or not that music is small, but olfaction, something where there's some focus, and then that gives you this branching off point to see different ways of constructing cognitive models or approaching insights from history and philosophy, different perspectives that would keep it grounded in something, because otherwise it can just start seeming very large and unwieldy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like an approach. I mean, the cognitive science, as Matt was saying, it's how you, like you mentioned, Matt mentioned this ASFA's paper, and how do we understand olfaction from all these different disciplines. And I think that, like, for me, that's as concrete as it gets. It's more like an approach.
In terms of building a larger curriculum, I think that Tania's note that what cognitive science is going to look like is very dependent on the context in which you are in. And I think we really just need to remember that there's just a lot of practical limitations. So in many ways, I would kind of start with what you have and then think about, in a very sort of data-driven way, how you're going to incorporate that information. That would be my sort of recommendation for building up a curriculum. The other thing is I feel like the initial temptation is to list things by department. Instead of doing that, I think focusing it around thematic areas of various kinds. And now I'm blanking on the ones that we sort of restructured our curriculum that way. And it enabled sort of different ways of thinking about connections across departments. That was, I think, really helpful. So.
Great. A lot of terrific ideas here. I think we are slowly coming to the end of our time. I want to thank all of the panelists for a great discussion and all of the members of the audience. I think it's clear that there's a lot of passion in this community. There's a lot of investment. There's a lot of creativity in trying to bring together all of these aspects of cognitive science. And I would like to hope, I hope to see you all again at our next webinar on June 4th. The topic is setting up cognitive science programs, institutes, or centers. June 4th at noon EST. We're going to have more announcements coming out about that. I would like to invite everybody to stay in touch with the Cognitive Science Society, with the Higher Education Committee. Write to us, give us your feedback, give us ideas about future webinar topics, tell us about other ways of engaging the community, spread the word, and make sure that we all move forward as a community and share our knowledge and our passion for this field. Thanks again, everybody. It was great to see everybody. That's a wrap. Bye-bye.